Think of me by your side. Know what we have to do. Baby, it'll be alright. I know that it's hard being apart. Show no fear. Know what we have to do. But soon I'll be there with you.
Hey, good morning, folks. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Stephen McNelly, and I'm joined by a long-term friend and colleague, Kurt Othmer, and we're here today to talk about kind of the essentials to live streaming. And right now, I think it's a really difficult time with COVID, and especially us feeling apart. And I genuinely feel like live streaming at its core really brings us together. And you're going to see me checking in on some things. It's just me today. It's literally just me. I'm our audio engineer, switcher, producer, TD, and pulling in hosts. And I think live streaming fundamentally at its core is really about bringing people closer to the experience of being there. And that being said, I'd like to bring in Kurt Othmer, who is the president of EEG Info, and just have him talk a little bit about, Kurt, if you could tell us how you got into live streaming and maybe some of the problems and challenges that you faced live streaming.
Sure. Sure. Well, we're all live streamers now, right? This is welcome to the COVID world. All of a sudden, all your TV channels and everybody, all your news anchors are all broadcasting from their living rooms. And so we're all live streamers today. So what got me into live streaming is that necessity. So we sort of have two main reasons we live stream. One is for professional content. So we're in alternative health and healthcare. And so medical doctors and psychologists and so forth who listen to our courses broadcast live and our conferences broadcast live. So there's sort of that professional audience. And so we've got a classroom with cameras in it and robotic cameras and a studio and stuff like that. And then the other reason to live stream is this is my little live stream setup right here that I go live on Facebook. And that's much more promotional, really just talking to folks, lay folks, professionals, essentially everyone who's floating by on Facebook. And so that's a more promotional thing, which again, a lot of us are probably also getting involved with right now as we're retooling and changing careers midstream. And so, yeah, we're all streamers now, aren't we?
Let's see.
You asked me.
That's really true. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Please.
No, you asked about challenges. I can jump into that if you want to. And I think major challenges that we've faced, it's been audio. It's so funny because we've had times when we've streamed conferences and we've had picture problems and nobody cares. It was really, we had this total disaster. We had an ATEM that somebody unplugged. Anyway, it broke the thing when you unplug it in the middle of a firmware update. You might be surprised to learn. And so we lost the ATEM, and so the camera operator had a really cool idea to just stream from her laptop that was controlling one of the cameras and just streamed from that until the ATEM magically came back to life again after an hour or so. And so she was just streaming her, and it was funny because people could still hear through that whole time. The audio was still going out the whole time. It was the video and the ATEM that was broken. So everybody still could hear the audio and people were fine with it. There was no picture for a while and then they were streaming. And then one person wrote in the little chat, like, hey, we can see the lady like controlling that camera with her mouse. And it's like, yeah, so they weren't bothered. But the audio, when we've had the slightest little puff of air on a microphone, people are like, oh my gosh, the audio is not perfect. And then we had this clipping of the Wi-Fi. So the wireless the belt packs, we had these the least expensive Shure belt packs, and we kept having wireless interference, and then we just kept having to upgrade those. And we're now running really the best thing with wireless workbench and everything with the Shure microphones to have just the best audio, because any little glitch and people just tear their hair out. And so that's the biggest thing we've run into. And the biggest solution that has mattered the most to us is just audio.
I think it's true. And it's just buttery smooth coming with us today. And I'm just going to toss your studio up here again 1 second. And so, this is what Kurt's built out. And he mentioned the ATEM. That's a professional live production mixer, video switcher. And, I want to start at the ground here, Kurt, for everyone. And it's like, this is what Kurt's built out, but we don't need to start here. And I think that's the important thing of what we're talking about today.
One quick note.
We're kind of introducing. Yes.
Sorry, one quick note. That studio is thanks to you, right? When I needed to build a studio and we needed to live stream our classes and we needed to do all this, the guy I called is Steve. So all of that's all Steve's fault.
And I think this attests also to, I guess, the passion that goes into this space, Kurt, is we're really producing content that people are passionate about, and they're niche communities and micro communities. That being said, you folks probably have had some kind of asks that have been coming into your business, and as promised, I kind of want to maybe dive in and start to deliver and talk about some of those asks. How does that sound, Kurt?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, and you know, we don't have that many people joining us. We have 7 people joining us. We've got someone from Minnesota. I've got a chat here. It's about 3 seconds off. You know, usually live streaming, it might be 15, 30 seconds a minute, but we're using YouTube's super low latency stream, and it's really, really, really fast. So we'll see your questions come in. If it's something for me or something for Kurt, or if you want a deeper explanation, you know, let us know.
Nice.
Okay, that being said, I'm just going to pop this agenda up here. And if there's anything different that you folks are hoping to hear about today, let us know. We got a small crowd. Hopefully a lot more people will watch this on the back end. But the folks that are here today, I think we can take some extra time and just slow it down. And if there's anything that you've had questions about to start and engage in live streaming, let us know. Also, if you have any technical troubles, pop it in the chat. We're doing our best to do this, just the 2 of us. I'm doing all the switching, streaming, audio. Let us know, and we'll make sure we take care of it right away. So we're going to kind of walk through this basic workflow, and you've seen this diagram if you've seen the live stream page. We're going to talk about the sources, and those are probably some of the sources that you're traditionally familiar with. Cameras, laptops, playback devices, things like that. And then we're going to talk about input devices. Now, since this is a time when maybe some of these asks are coming up, I'm going to focus this conversation more on computer and software related solutions. So that being said, we'll kind of need a way to get those computer devices, those capture devices, into your computer. And so we'll talk about some of the best solutions out there, and maybe what your goals are, because some of those solutions might be different depending upon what you're trying getting into. Maybe you're trying to get it into a production software like Wirecast, or maybe you just want to get it into a Zoom call. So we'll talk about what we need. We'll touch briefly on standards conversions. So I think, you know, Kurt can probably attest to this, but usually when you have a switcher, if your camera is not the same format as your switcher, you need some sort of converter in the middle. And if you don't have a converter, you might be outputting something from your switcher, but it's just not showing up. I don't know if you've had any experience with that, Kurt.
It's a nightmare. I mean, luckily, you know, I mentioned the ATEM, the big switching controller from Blackmagic, and thanks for clarifying that one. And you know, luckily the newer ones are coming out with converters in them, because it just, you know, it's like modern technology. We're kind of used to plugging a USB cord into something, and the computer just does whatever magic it does, and the device just shows up. So why isn't it the same with an HDMI cable or an SDI cable, some video source, and you're plugging that in, and you're like, why doesn't this show up? It's just a black screen. Why? What? And it's not like there's a helpful consumer level message that's like, your rate, you know, your frame rate is wrong, you know, your scan rate is wrong, the resolution is wrong, and it's just black. It's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell you why, and you just have to figure it out. And so yeah, we ended up with all of these little decimators and that do the conversions, so that we can have everything at the exact right rate and resolution. And what a mess.
And so we're not going to dive in too deep there, because the really fortunate thing is that a lot of these software applications solve that problem. Zoom, Wirecast, they're going to do that scaling for you. But I think it's still important to understand, because it can tax your computer more if you're outputting at a different resolution than you're inputting at a different frame rate, different format, or it can degrade the quality. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk about switching. And like I said, you know, we're going to focus here mostly on software-based solutions. But we'll touch on a cool couple hardware solutions. Kurt keeps mentioning ATEM coming up. And usually that's a production switcher that costs several thousands of dollars. But they've also come out with a really inexpensive one that does some really exciting things, that's more flexible and applicable to these webcast type solutions.
Well, can I talk to that just real quick? It's
Sure.
it's the two uses because I use both, right? So we have the big studio where we have a 2 ME, $6,000 or something, and it's taking all the cameras and all the computers and all these sources, and then two people are in there mixing and doing all the work to control that thing. And versus when I do my Facebook Live, I just use you mentioned Wirecast, but I use OBS. It's even cheaper. It's free, and I use that to switch a few webcams so I can give people a little angle from back there, and I can give them this microphone, and I give them this angle here, and so I give them a few different camera angles, and I can switch. And then what's really cool is I can just switch to see my screen, and so I can be showing like a slide. I can be doing a presentation, so I can have my slides all ready to go. And then I don't need to be doing any kind of conversion to like take a computer screen and convert it to put it into the ATEM to broadcast it. It just works with OBS. I can just go to display desktop and it just displays the desktop. And then I go back to camera and I actually set my keyboard up to have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different selections. And I can just be pushing those buttons on the keyboard. And so from just a one-man show where I'm just talking live on Facebook Live, I can do that myself. It was free. I have a couple webcams and then a really good microphone. And it works. It works really well. I don't use these big crazy headphones though when I do that. It's just so I can hear you,
It's a
Steve.
good look. You look like you're in the radio. Kurt actually has a background in radio. He's
Really
showing it
importantly, I
off
need to
right now.
look like I know what I'm doing. See, this makes me look like I know gear.
And then the next piece of gear that we're talking about will be compression, and 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 again we'll touch on it briefly, but it's really important to understand like what the best default settings for the signal that you're sending out to YouTube or Facebook or whatever platform that you're using should be. And the fortunate thing is now software like OBS that Kurt was mentioning handles three things. It handles all that standards conversion, the switching, and compression in one. So it's a really good thing. But we'll also just talk about some of the things to watch out for because you do have one piece of software doing all those three things. We'll touch briefly on network. I'm going to touch mostly on home networks because that's where a lot of us are right now. I'm streaming from my home. I know Kurt's office is right around the corner. I think you were able to.
Well, and no
jump
one's
back in.
here. Everybody's gone. So that's, I have quarantine here.
And it's and just as a point of reference, Kurt has, what did you say you had, 500 megabits a second up or something like that?
Yeah, I am beautifully sitting on 500 by 500 mbits fiber. It was really funny because when I first signed up for the thing, it was really, really low, and it was like 5 mbits or something. And I remember calling up and being like, "Hey, could I upgrade my speed?" And he's like, "You have 500 by 500. You want to upgrade that?" I'm like, "No, no, no. I'm sorry, I called. Just yeah." They didn't So anyway, we have some
Yeah.
ridiculous speed in here, low latency, which even with that, we've had streaming issues. So. What can you do?
And so just to give you some context, even if you don't know a lot about compressed videos, if you are really involved in production and that's your core subject matter expertise, I have 30 up, 35 up, depending, and that's after upgrading my speeds. And I'm streaming from my home, so I'm doing some things a little bit more conservatively than Kurt might be doing at his office.
Can you tell me what conservative is though? Because like you floored me with this when we were talking yesterday. Because I was running running our conference here at full 1080p resolution, and I gave it like 30 mbits, and you were like, you don't need to give it that much. And I mean, can you give me a better picture of what is conservative? I mean, how do I?
Sure. Yeah. Let's dive. I have a whole slide on that. Let's dive into that.
Sorry,
and then we could
rushing you
let's
ahead.
let's dive into that story when we get there.
Cool.
And then the last thing I want to talk about here is the platform that we're using, right? So you have a whole bunch of people that you want to reach, and where should you be pushing it out? There's a lot of free options. We'll talk about the free options. There's paid options. We'll talk about maybe some of the things you get from going that paid route. And so we'll talk about what you want to accomplish. And so I'm going to hope to give you kind of a framework of questions that you can be asking yourself, asking your business, asking the use case, to hopefully help you decide where you want to be going. All right. So that being said, let's dive in here, and we'll talk about sources. You probably already have a bunch of sources, and if you think about them here, really the output, thoughts about the output really start at input. For instance, Facebook.
Why do I have a bunch of sources?
Go ahead.
Why do I have a bunch of sources? You're like, you probably have a bunch of sources, but what are my sources?
So I think, I mean, you can probably tell us, what are your most common sources, Kurt?
Well, I mean, in fairness, I guess what I'm asking is because right now all I have is one webcam and one microphone. So it's, and in you know, in one world, I could just use the microphone built into my webcam. So one could just go that simply.
And I think this goes to the context of live streaming is I think about it is bringing people closer to the experience of being somewhere. And so we can do that. We have multiple cameras. When you're in an environment, you turn your head around, you might be focused on a presenter, you might kind of step back and take the whole thing in, which is, you know, the equivalent of like a wide shot, or you might pivot around. And you've all experienced these things, and maybe you're not even cognizant of all these changes happening. I mean, we're working with some production people and film people, so I think you're well aware of shot composition, how it affects people. But those are some of the things that we want to accomplish live. And so in production, you might only accomplish them with one camera, move it in, close up, wide, have the opportunity to edit. But here we're editing live. And so I just want to give you, so you're familiar with the sources that you have. You might have a laptop, a presentation, but thinking about where they go, the technical aspects of where they go, will inform how you set up those sources. For instance, Facebook Live, with a few exceptions, only streams at 30 frames a second at 720. YouTube maxes out at 60 frames a second. And then thinking about the type of content that you have should start at the beginning. I've just got a slide splashed up here with some of the bullets here. And so if you're doing a high frame rate gaming, maybe it makes a lot of sense to stream at a high frame rate like 60 frames a second. If you're doing talking heads and slides like we're doing today, maybe it's more important that the slides are really, really crystal sharp. So today I'm streaming at 1080, and I'm streaming at 30 frames a second because I want you folks to have nice crystal clear, sharp slides. And then think about the supported resolutions of your switching software and also the progressive resolutions. I know we can interlace video, but I found that compressing interlace video just doesn't, it's not as sharp as just starting with a progressive signal off the bat. So if I'm streaming to Facebook anyway, and I could do 1080i or 720p, I'll probably choose 720p. And then, and I think about my computer, what it's capable of handling. 720p is 1/4 the information of 1080. So if I have a slower computer, it might make more sense than that. And forgive me, we only have 6 people. So I'm looking over here. Let me just see if there is any questions that are coming in. We have a hello from Florida. Greg, I went to school with you. Nice to see you here, man. We have hello from San Diego. And
San Diego.
Thanks for joining us today. And like I said, feel free to slow it down at any point. This is for you folks. And I'm sure there'll be people that watch it afterwards, but let's take the opportunity that we can have this small conversation. I think this is really delightful today.
Hey, we're talking about streaming, and this is the reality. Is I often stream to 2 or 3 people, and that's that. I mean, I'd like to believe that I'm world famous, but you know, hey, the reality is that we do have a big audience. We have a lot of followers, but they're not always where you want them to be. They're not always finding you on Facebook. And Facebook, I've noticed, isn't as aggressive at telling your followers, like it used to really pop up messages to be like, so and so is live right now. And Facebook isn't as aggressive at doing that anymore. And so not as many people are finding your streams. And I think so if I can just shift over there really quick, and what I've learned is that, you know, Facebook keeps rebroadcasting that. And so people tune in their time zone and they feel like it's live right then. They think that they actually hit that broadcast right at the beginning. So in terms of Facebook, I try to make sure that I fill those first 3 seconds, which I hate that about Facebook, that Facebook actually puts you live before the countdown has finished. So you're standing there like watching the countdown like a fool, and then it's going live, and you've just lost people who are scrolling by, and they just see your face staring at a countdown, and they're like, well, this isn't interesting. So I often start talking before the counter has finished counting down, and I'm just sort of saying a few like, hello everybody, welcome to, you know, I'm going to be talking about some stuff, and so that they kind of are arriving in the middle of the conversation, so that they know that immediately it's going to be interesting, and that there's something, oh, whoa, that guy's flailing his arms around. Maybe I'll stick around and see what he's doing. And, but I'm often talking to a small audience at first, and sometimes it builds, but you get great camaraderie, and people are communicating back and waving from, you know, I get a lot of followers from around the globe. I think it's largely because I broadcast in the morning, where it's evening time in Norway and Sweden and so forth. So they're like, oh, let me go browse Facebook, and oh, look, Kurt's live. And so there's a real reality that over the rest of the day, I'll get more and more and more watches of the video that I did that morning, and that'll continue to grow hundreds of views over the next 24 hours.
And that's one interesting thing about, you know, this community as well you know, we're connected to a largely professional community, and I'd like to be able to deliver Skillshares more towards people that are really interested in becoming part of this community. So if you know people or know communities that are looking for this kind of information, help me to point them at it, help me have some topics and conversations that'll further those conversations. And if you have questions, I'm going to share some of the thoughts about what we want to have further talks about at the end. But if you have topics that you want to know more about, let us have those kinds of conversations here as well. So just reeling it back in, going back to the pipeline here that we were talking about. So, you know, after your sources that you're pretty familiar with, you have your input devices, right? And these are things that will take your SDI signal or HDMI signal and get them into your computer to do your live switching. And I just want to give you some general overall considerations, and then I'm also going to give you a couple examples of some things that are cheap and some things that work well with some various different pieces of software. But consider what you'll be using for switching. And I use the term switching in this context very, very loosely. If I think about Hangouts or Zoom or Wirecast or OBS, you're all choosing a source. There's multiple things coming into your computer, multiple microphones, multiple video sources, and you're choosing one. You're making that decision. Different video input devices work differently with different software solutions, though. For instance, Wirecast can see a lot of Thunderbolt solutions, while things like Zoom, Hangouts might only be able to see kind of these USB solutions that look more like webcams. Another consideration is what format your signal is. Is it SDI or HDMI? And so that informs like what kind of capture device you'll need. Obviously, you'll need one that's compatible, or you'll have to convert it. And maybe you already have converters around, so that's not even a big deal. And also think about if the signal needs to go anywhere. I bring this up because, you know, in production, we could use a distribution amplifier to duplicate a signal and send it multiple places, like a projector and a recorder. If we're being asked to do this from our home, from a studio, maybe we don't have those things available. Some of the capture devices actually have pass-throughs where you put in one SDI signal and one comes out. You can send it onto a recorder, send it onto a projector. So I just wanted to pop a couple recommendations here on the screen. This one is the Blackmagic Ultra Studio Mini Recorder. I've owned one of these for years. And by the way, I'm not affiliated with Blackmagic or any of the products we're offering, and I'm also doing this really independently of my day-to-day role, looking after platforms and providing production support. This is one, I'm mentioning it first because it's the cheapest, and it can be one of the most flexible tools you have. It has both an HDMI and SDI in. It only supports up to 30 frames a second, but for some people, that's that's going to be just fine because we're only streaming slides or we're only having a talk like this, so it's not going to be too much of an issue. But the one caveat is that it's Thunderbolt. So things like Zoom, Skype, this may or may not work on. You'll want to do some heavy testing. I found that browser-supported things tend not to play well with these type of devices. Not as a hard, absolute fast rule, but more USB devices that show up looking like webcams tend to be more compatible. This is an interesting recommendation. I mentioned if you need audio inputs, you can bring your audio into the camera, and your camera will allow you to use that audio source. But the Blackmagic Ultra Studio HD, a little bit more expensive. It does allow you to do up to 60 frames a second. So if you want to go live to YouTube at 60 frames a second, or you want to go to Twitch at 60 frames a second, this might be something that works really well for you. And also, what's really nice is it has quarter-inch audio inputs. So if you want to come out of an audio board, you can go right directly into this thing. And then I'll just leave you with two more. And the two I'm splashing up here, this is the Magewell capture devices. There's two different flavors of them. And these show up similar to a webcam on your computer. The first one, the HDMI Plus or SDI Plus, has a pass-through. And so you can come out of that and go to another monitor, go to another recorder. And then the other one that's a little bit cheaper just has that single input. But if you need to get up and running, it's one of the simplest, fastest ways to get up and running. I don't know, Kurt, if you had any thoughts about capture devices. I mean, you were using one this morning, I think, right?
Yeah.
Playing around with a couple of solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's what sources do you want? And that's kind of, I threw that question back on you because it's one I struggle with. Like, I really want to give people lots of dynamics. I want to give them like another angle from back here, but I mean, how many camera angles do they need of my ugly mug, right? I mean, it's not so. But what am I capturing? And then once I know what I'm trying to get into the system, then it's I actually have this really cool. I wonder if I can get it into the frame here. I don't think the cables are long enough, but I have this just really cool little web presenter. I don't think Blackmagic even sells it anymore. It's the same thing that the new ATEM Mini thing does. But basically, it just takes the SDI or an HDMI and just turns it into a webcam. So like the ones you were mentioning there too, that basically it just turns it into a USB webcam. And what I love about it is it's so just like idiot proof. You just plug it in and the computer's like, oh, there's a webcam. There's no drivers in the Mac or the PC. You just plug it in and it just works. And so it just sees it immediately as a thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so easy. So any of those that make it that simple. And, I was just talking to my buddy who is, in the same situation we are, all of trying to become web streamers. And he's like, how do I get that, buttery background where it's all blurred out back there? And, with my professional camera gear from my day job, how do I get that for the live stream? And that's where a device like that allows you to take one of those cameras, take the SDI out or the HDMI out, plug it into one of those boxes, and then just it pops up like a USB camera. And so now all of a sudden you're streaming to just Zoom or to one of those more complicated switching products like Wirecast or OBS,
and
Open Broadcast or something.
Thought about this is we're having this conversation, hopefully to some production professionals that have a lot of these input tools, really nice cameras and lenses already, and how can we up-level them over the webcam? You folks know how to set them up, how to color them correctly, and how to get a really pristine image that can blow a webcam out of the water. So that's why we want to talk about some of these conversion devices. I did have a question that came in from Greg, and he said, when thinking about small businesses wanting to move to live, what would be your recommendation to them starting out, specifically if they believe their live platform will grow significantly? So I'm going to touch briefly on this. I've got one recommendation in here, and then when I get to that recommendation, since we've got a nice crowd here, maybe we can dive in a little bit more. I had a slide that I hid, so maybe I can unhide that one, and we can just talk a little bit about what you get when you spend just a little bit more out of the box. All right, so thanks for that question. I'm going to jump in here and talk a little bit briefly about standards conversion. And like we mentioned, basically with your software switchers, you tend to get those kind of all in one. And so we don't really need to focus on this one too much. We might double back on it if we have more questions. But our software usually does the scaling and frame rate conversions, and in most cases it happens automatically. That being said, it can be more taxing on your computer and depending what software application you're using. So I find that it's always best to try to get the input matching the frame rate, resolution, format of your canvas or your production switcher, and have that also tend to be coinciding with your output, unless your outputs are different things. Maybe if you're going to multiple platforms like YouTube and Facebook and some other ones, you'll want to start with the highest common denominator and work down. But as a general rule of thumb, try to match your input and your switching at least together to get the highest quality signal and the least amount of potential complications. And that being said,
let me
just pause there. If there's any questions there. What's that?
Or you just plug stuff together until you see a picture and just pound on it until it works.
But I mean, I remember my first switcher, and I thought it was broken. I thought it was the most ludicrous, insane thing. I plugged a cable in, and I just didn't see it.
Yeah.
Because I expect like a TV, you plug it in, and it works.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But we are. The thing is, the great thing is we are getting there, and I'm going to show you, and we'll circle back with a question Greg asked about some of the devices that are coming out now that are so inexpensive that solve some of these problems, so well. But I'm not going to dwell on that too much. I'm going to hop into talk about the actual meat of what we're using to push things out live, which is our switching software. And I'm going to toss a couple recommendations up here. You see Wirecast and OBS. And I just want to stop and say these are just a couple recommendations. There's tons and tons of software switching solutions. There's ones that operate in web browsers, in the cloud. You can have multiple people signed in, and that maybe you can even do some lightweight video conference calls in, so you can bring 4 or 5 people together. There's paid solutions, there's free solutions. I just want to give people a flavor of what's out there, so I'm going to just talk briefly about 2 that I use. Wirecast is a paid solution. It's nice because they let you download it as a free trial, and it unlocks all the features. It just does like a watermark on the video and over the audio. So it says this is a demonstration of Wirecast. But the nice thing is, it is $599. The nice thing is, so you can decide if it's a good choice for you. What I do really like about it is, you click a plus arrow, and it's really easy to add sources, add audio sources, add video sources, graphics, make things side by side. And
but
then,
why would
there's free software. Go ahead.
Yeah, why would I use something that's $5.99? I mean, when there's like OBS, the Open Broadcaster thing.
Yeah, so taking a look back here, OBS. I use OBS a lot, especially when I'm just doing some testing. Mm-hmm. It's free. That's great, there's tons of features like Wirecast. I find that the learning curve is a little bit steeper, and some of the, it's a little bit more manual. Like, with Wirecast, if you want to go to some really popular destinations like YouTube, Facebook, you can just sign in. You don't need to enter any information. You don't need to enter any encoder information. It's all there, and you just hit go. Some of them, even do a health check for you, and so you'll almost be guaranteed a perfect stream. Things always go wrong, but it'll help. And I don't know. I think that's been my take on OBS. I don't know if you have a different kind of background experience, but tons of features.
No, if I'm honest, I watched some educational videos on how to really get the cameras to show up and resize them and stuff like that. So there was definitely a learning curve at the beginning with OBS to get comfortable with the way they handle things and how to set it up. And then I also had a teething issue with OBS that here in the office, there's really good security for the whatever the firewall and stuff, and it couldn't punch a hole through it. It couldn't get to YouTube. We can watch YouTube videos, but I couldn't broadcast out to, I guess it was Facebook that I was trying to broadcast to, and I couldn't get there. We had to call the network people, and they had to be like, oh yeah, you have to turn this thing off so that you can do that. And I mean, the big clincher for me was when I went home, it worked fine. So on my cheap router at home, it worked, but at the office, which was too much security.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, there's some of the subtle distinctions here, but there's tons out there. Download them, try them, and play around with them, and see which one fits your needs as well. If you only need to mix 2 cameras or slides in a camera, there might be a cheaper thing that's very purpose built just for that. Well, since Greg asked the question, yeah, Kurt.
Yeah, no, I was going to also circle back to Greg's question because I was, sort of, in terms of streaming. I mean, I think all of us can get a little too geeked into this, and the thing I talk to in the sales side is just who are you talking to? Like, what content are you trying to serve? Because people would way rather have you get out there with your content than to have it look like the Avengers movies. So to just get it out there and then think about who you're talking to, because a lot of these things, and I kind of pelted you with that, Steve, is, yeah, I want to dress this up with more camera angles and things like that, but at the same time, does that buy me something? Am I getting something for that versus just turning on my webcam and saying what I need to say and just making it live? And I personally am always trying to walk that balance. Like, if it takes me 5 hours to set up my live stream setup and then I end up not doing it because it was such a laborious process trying to just make it happen for the first time, then maybe it's better to just start it with a webcam.
Yeah, I mean, if you're having trouble I want to give people solutions, where we can start going, for less than $1,000, which can be a good chunk of change to still invest, but know that for as little as $300, if you have a camera and you have a laptop already, you can start going already. Yep. There's nothing else holding you back. You just need a way to get your stuff, your content, into your computer.
Yeah.
All right, I've got one slide here on the switchers, on dedicated switching hardware that I just kind of unhid here, and I've got a recommendation here afterwards. But we asked about if you think we're going to get big into the live stream space, maybe investing a little bit more upfront so we don't have to double back later. So I had put this together just to give you a little bit of context for some of the differences that we have with large production switchers or more full-featured things. First of all, just out of the gate, they tend to be more expensive, and for the price, there tends to be less features. And I know that makes maybe not a lot of sense right off the bat, but one interesting thing to note is that they're incredibly, incredibly stable. You can leave them on 24/7 in a rack with all your network gear, and they will just keep on working all the time, day and night. My home switching solution, I've had to reboot things, plug things in again, and swap cables out. These things just are workhorses and will just keep working. The other thing you might need to note is you don't need a whole bunch of capture devices for every input you want to do. Usually, like this switcher here, I think it's around, I'm looking at the ATEM 2ME, I think they're around $4,000. Does that sound about right, Kurt?
Oh gosh, I thought we spent like 6 for ours. Maybe it's come down since then, but
6?
yeah, I thought it was
Yeah, I think they have come
595.
down. But you get what, 40 inputs, I think, on that switcher?
I think it's 20.
So 20. It's a lot of inputs, and they have bigger ones too.
Yeah.
But you get tons of inputs. So if you have a concert or something like that, or I guess maybe Kurt, can you kind of explain the context of that you use your switcher like in the clinical setting?
So on the professional side, essentially we've got robotic cameras all throughout the classroom so that we can, keep people awake, give them lots of different camera angles. And so when they're switching, essentially we've got all of those. And then we have both a Mac and a PC. And so the PC will run more software stuff, and then the Mac will run slides. And so we'll have the presentation on one, and then we'll have more software stuff on the other, and then all those different camera angles, and then we're popping between them to just keep it dynamic. And then a whole bunch of audience shots, and so the cameras. And then we've got another one of your recommendations. We've got this really cool Panasonic camera that we can use an iPad to just where we can see the pictures of the audience. We can actually see the whole audience. We can just poke it and it'll go right to a given person. So it's almost like another switcher in that way, that you can just actually, you're seeing a camera that has all the people in it, and you just touch a person's face, and then the big camera turns and goes right to that person's face. It's really cool camera combination thing.
It's really cool, really easy to find people.
Yeah.
And then also, at this point, we start to talk about doing backups as well. You mentioned having a laptop. For really mission critical things, you might have a laptop with notes and slides, and you might have a secondary laptop with notes and slides. Maybe you've got another machine just playing back the video clips that you had, and maybe another backup of those. And so with a larger production switcher, you can swap those sources really quickly. You can create little scripts to swap those backups really quickly. And make sure you have a really bulletproof production. Some of the downsides is they tend to not to be cohesive all-in-one solutions. So you'll spend a little bit more to get up and running. For instance, I'm just going to walk through a few more of these bullets here. There's no built-in scalers. So if you have a laptop that you can't quite make the same frame rate as the switcher, which happens to me quite frequently. So I almost always just put a scaler right on the thing just to begin with.
Always.
You'll
just
need
use the scaler.
Some scalers. One of the cool things is there's really no maxing these things out.
Right.
If they say they can switch 40 inputs and put up graphics and lower thirds and play video clips, they will do that. They will not bog down like a piece of software. So whatever they say they can do, they will do, and you can do it to their fullest extent. You may need some sort of companion device. So I'm using a small switcher at home, and I'm running it off an iPad. With ATEM, there's software switchers you can run on the iPad or a laptop. What's nice is they don't need to be very powerful. They're just sending little text commands, essentially, right to the switcher. And so they can be a really not very powerful machine, but you can still use them to load on graphics and do some switching and have someone assist the technical operator. A couple more bullets on this. You might need an additional monitor. Let me just hop back to Kurt's slide here. And you can see in his control room, we've got some multi-views. And I think you have your cameras up on there. And
those are the two outputs
your
from the
presentation
ATEM 2ME.
sources.
Yeah, so it's the two main, so the main technical director sits on the right there, and then he's got both the preview and program, and then the main 8 cameras are below that, and then over on the other, we have a bunch of other stuff. The PCs are over there, the hyperdecks, so we have a lot of like playback hyperdecks and things, and then just other sources to run other things. And then all that getting controlled. There on the bottom left, if you see that, you see the little iPad where there's like the zoomed in view of the chairs above, and then the wide view of the chairs below it, and then our big Scarhoy control panel in the front of the technical director there.
And just to give a little bit more color to the camera that he's mentioning, some like the iPad iPhone, iPad cameras allow you to pinch and zoom, and you're effectively, I mean, some of them have multiple lenses now, but you're effectively just kind of cropping digitally in. The camera Kurt mentions has a wide-angle camera at the base that transmits to an iPad, and so you can tap anywhere on this wide-screen image, and the robotic camera that sits above it swirls around and snaps in on someone's face really quickly.
It's so cool. It's so cool. Yeah, it's 2 cameras.
And
It's
so
cool.
yeah. Just polishing this off, those are those monitors that you saw. You'll need some additional equipment. And there's generally, I'll show you an exception, but there's generally no encoding. So that's usually a separate device, and that might be several $1,000s more. So probably, I would say if you're very conservative, if you have all your input gear and things like that, getting a really robust hardware switcher, I think you could probably do it for about 10 grand, I'd say, Kurt, right, nowadays, if you have all the input stuff, the infrastructure.
Well, like with the switcher and cameras, or what are you thinking?
I'm just thinking, speaking to production production people that have audio gear, have camera gear, but just need something to switch it and push it out live on the internet, less than $10,000. You could value engineer it down even less.
We started really small. I mean, we started with the 1ME to keep prices down. And today you've got cheaper stuff than that. Like that was the lowest budget we could go at the time. That was all Blackmagic had. But now, I mean, $295 for the 4 input, the A10 Mini, like that is good enough to start for a class like we do, or for live broadcast, or certainly for gaming, which is another big streaming one we haven't talked too much about. I mean, you mentioned streaming to Switch, but I think, having multiple inputs so that you're not overtaxing the computer and using something like the A10 Mini, I mean, that's $295 and you're done. And then you just, you need a camera, and then you plug your computer output into another one of those inputs on the A10 Mini, and you're off and streaming.
I'm going to splash that up here now. This is the thing Kurt keeps talking about. I popped up a picture of the control panel and the back of the A10 Mini. Nice. And like you said, this thing starts at $295. And so, Greg, if you want to just take one level up, getting into live production than just a simple capture device, this thing will help get there for you. A really cool thing to note is that it has, I think, 4 HDMI inputs on it. And those all have frame rate, those all have conversion on them. So if you have a camera that only outputs 1080i 60, and a laptop that outputs 1080p 60, and another device that does 1080p 30, and you set this thing up for 1080p 30, it'll all go in, and it'll convert them all I think they're Blackmagic for a reason. It truly is like magic. And this one that was released a little while back has a webcam output. So to Skype, Zoom, Wirecast, it looks pretty much just like a 1080p 30 webcam. And so it's compatible with a lot of different software. And then there's even a new model that just came out. This one's $295. I would like to see if I can get one to review, but it's what, $595, right? I think the new one, the Pro.
So, well, let me talk to that really quick. And that is that, so like the game streamers are really concerned about overloading their computer, right? Because you've got the game that you're trying to, you're trying to broadcast your game. You don't want to tax the computer where you're playing the game. So you really want to just keep that clean, keep your gaming computer clean. And then you take that source, you take that HDMI source, just duplication of the main monitor that you're using, and you run that into the A10 Mini. And then, then you're not taxing it. There's that second question of encoding, right? So you've got to encode it for YouTube or whatever. So the little ATEM Mini, the little $295 guy, the cheap guy, just has a USB that basically takes it as a webcam, and then you would encode it on another computer. So you do use a different computer for that. So if you have another computer around that you can use as your encoding computer, then you can buy the cheaper one. But as I understand it, actually from Steve, so correct me if I'm mistaken here, but as I understand it, the little more expensive one has the encoding built into it. So then it can encode and actually stream directly to YouTube or Twitch or something from within the ATEM.
You've
So
got it,
you're
yeah.
not then further
It has,
taxing another computer.
It has the encoding, like you said, built right in, and you set it up on a desktop, and that's pretty much how a standard encoder would work. Is you set it up from another device in a web page, or this one actually has a small application that you point at the network address of the device, and you set it up, and then it offloads all that processing power straight to this device. I just wanted to say hello to Adam. He's joining us from Colorado. Ari from Kaltura, and he's joining us late at night from Israel. So thanks for joining us there. I had a couple questions. Greg had another question about StreamYard and working well as a virtual TV studio. I have not personally had the opportunity to use StreamYard. For those who haven't heard of it, StreamYard is a solution that works in your browser, and I believe it gives you some free hours out of the start. And I might be wrong, but there's also some premium features that you can pay a little bit more, and it allows people to join from their webcams, from I believe your cell phone, and it allows you to switch them all in the cloud and send them on to a destination like YouTube. So, it's kind of like a virtual OBS. I would say it's probably a little bit more user-friendly. Another one to just mention is there's one from TVU, and it's paid. It's a very reasonable rate. I think starts at like $20 a month, and that allows you to take 4 sources, 4 cell phones, and use them as webcams. And it also allows you to use their bonded cellular packs. High-level bonded cellular packs are, if you haven't heard of them before, if you see like Good Morning America, or you see ESPN and they're toting a camera outside the stadium, basically they'll take a camera feed and I think of it like Willy Wonka. They chop it up into little tiny bits, and it has multiple built-in cellular cards, and that'll push it to a computer in the cloud, and you can use it as a source as well. So that's a cool thing about TVU, is you can use these bonded cellular packs as well as cameras that you can tell someone to set up and do something really quick and easy. And I know that one I played with a little bit has talkback and tally. So if you're using a cell phone, it'll tell the person on the camera when they're live. Me and Kurt right here, we're just bantering back and forth. He doesn't. We're having this conversation, but it'll actually indicate to that person that they're live, and the producer can talk back to them live. And I believe there's a similar feature in StreamYard. I think they're really new. They're really pioneering. One of the things that makes me a little bit nervous is if your internet does go down. Right now, I'm doing a local recording. So if something happens, I can still upload this content afterwards. So that makes me a little bit nervous if you have an unstable internet connection. But I think we're going to be seeing more stuff like this, because it's cheap, easy, and it's even really starting to be used at even the professional level. And if that's a topic you're interested in, I would love to do a topic. I've wanted to do maybe one of these talks about bonded cellular, and I think that would be a good time to even have a conversation about one of these like virtual switchers in the cloud. I've got a couple more slides, and I also want to talk about restreaming. I think that might be something people are interested in as well, which is the concept of sending up one stream or 2 streams and sending it multiple places in the cloud to Facebook or YouTube or another service that you have. I'm just going to pause here real quickly. Any other questions that we've had coming in about sources, input devices, switchers, frame rate conversion. I know it's a lot of content here. Give it a beat. I'll give
Well,
it 5 seconds.
tell us what you guys
yeah.
are doing. Tell us what kind of streaming needs. What do you guys see? What do you want to accomplish? What do you guys do? Tell us about yourselves. We'd love to hear from you guys.
There you go. Well, while people kind of people type that in, we've got 3 more kind of topics to kind of cover, and 30 minutes to go. I think we can do it. About encoding. We're going to talk real briefly about your network, and then we'll talk about the actual platform. And these are really huge topics, especially the platform side of things. But like I said, we're just going to give you folks a framework to start assessing those things for your own business case and your own business need. And by the way, if you folks can't hear us for any reason, or you're having difficulty viewing, let us know. Just me, just Kurt, and we're holding it down here. All right, so just going forward here in the home stretch. Oh, I got my next slide here, talking about encoding. So this is the process of taking these very large video files that come in at a very high quality on your computer and crunching them down so they can get to Facebook and YouTube and whatever service you choose all over the world. I think it's best to start with the recommendation of the service itself. And sometimes it can be a little bit buried, so I find one of the best things is to just Google. What's the best settings for Facebook or best settings for YouTube? And it usually surfaces right up at the top. And then, like we mentioned, popular software like Wirecast allows you to log right in. And so it does some of that configuration for you. It also does things like it sees the events that you've set up. I remember working on Wirecast, and I was actually able to make an event right on Facebook, right from Wirecast. And so I felt really confident that it would connect to that event, because I've had Facebook be a little bit finicky setting up events sometimes, but I felt really confident that the one I created in Wirecast would work really well with Wirecast. And so, if you can do it in the software, if you're new to this, start there. It's great to start there. And if you want to tweak things in the future, then go for it. As you know more and you played around with it more and tested it more, go for it. Change things. See if you can get looks or qualities that you're really looking for. If you are going to like a third-party service, I'm just going to give you a couple recommendations, and I think Kurt had a story here. I've got a few more bullets on the slide. If you're going to go 1280 by 720, and I'd recommend, remember, I'm having the context of people's home internet connection in mind and some of these consumer services. I'd recommend doing 30p at like 1 to 2.5 megabits a second. And it's a very conservative amount of information. Most internet connections can at least do 1 megabit a second. And I'd recommend everyone go to speedtest.net. If you're not familiar with it already, go there and see what the upload speed of your internet connection is. And I'd recommend doing it at different periods of the day. I'd recommend doing it during the time you're expecting, the day and time you're expecting to hold your event. Maybe your internet is not as great on Saturday at 10 a.m. because everyone's at home playing World of Warcraft. I don't know. I don't know the role play. I'm not a gamer. Whatever people play online nowadays. Yeah. So test it out. If you're going 1920 by 1080, I'd recommend doing it at 30p again, unless you have some reason like high-speed graphics, at like 3 to 6 megabits a second, and frame it up in terms of the content. Things like this, like if I'm looking over, YouTube actually was telling me it was getting a low bit rate, a lower quality than it was expecting. And that is because I was just streaming slides, and my encoder is giving me a range, and it's actually saying, okay, I actually don't, this is just a white background and black text. I don't need as much information to describe this video in a compressed format. And so it actually lowered my bit rate. So I've been streaming this at 3 megabits a second. We're doing a lot of these split screens. My shot is locked off, so we're not getting a lot of motion other than me, other than Kurt. And then we're just doing slides. And if you can't log in, and it's a third-party service, and there's no connection between the services, you're going to look for something called RTMP information. This is just general rule of thumb. Most services, most platforms, streaming services have RTMP information, and it looks like a URL, but instead of it starting with HTTP, it starts with RTMP, that stands for Real-Time Messaging Protocol. And it'll also have like a key. And I guess high level, you can think of those almost like a username and password to your live stream. So you also want to keep those very safe and secure in your production binder, only let your production people know.
A lot of them expire too.
Stream.
That's
a lot of them do expire, and that's another thing you need to be careful about is if they
don't
expire,
set it up the day before.
Don't setting up. Yeah, I like RTMP information that doesn't expire, but it can be a security risk. But you just be aware of who has it, and then also be aware of if it expires or not, because you don't want the person that set up your streaming information to be unavailable. Just going to pause, really briefly there, and just put forth, does anyone have any questions, just generally, really high level about just the encoding process?
Well, and while you're doing that, I'll tell my little story, because sometimes it really is about. Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Anyway, so yeah, no, just telling my story real quick about different streaming services. I mean, sometimes it really is about finding the piece to the puzzle, because we had one year where we were streaming the whole big conference, and we got to the end of the third day and end of the last day, and it just all of a sudden everybody was like, we can't hear you, we can't see you, the stream's breaking up. And we restarted. That year we were using Vimeo to stream. And we were on with tech support with Vimeo. They're like, we don't have a problem, and our internet seemed fine, and everything. It was completely unclear what had gone wrong. We were streaming. I mean, I was talking to Steve about it yesterday. We were streaming at a really high bit rate. We were streaming like 30 Mbits, but it had worked the previous 2.5 days. It was just that last day that all of a sudden the stream just was breaking down like crazy. And I have no idea who's to blame. Is it the bit rate that we were encoding at? Is it our encoder? We rebooted the encoder, we restarted the stream. And still, so I don't know what was causing it, but those things can just go wrong. So backup encoding, distributing to multiple, I have no idea that one was really frustrating for a whole lot of people. Luckily we didn't.
And that's one thing you said is, backup, and that's one thing that I think I just want to point out as a risk factor that although software is really cheap, it can also be one single point of failure. If your computer goes down, your capture devices, your recording, your encoding also go down. There's a lot of professional services out there, even free ones like YouTube, that allow you to send in 2 streams. And if one stream were to go out, that stream would still continue, and uninterrupted, and people wouldn't even know that anything ever happened. So you could have an encoder go out. Maybe you want to have a separate internet connection. You could have an internet connection go out, and you'd be going.
Yeah, we're sitting on dual internet connections in here, and then the router handles it. But you also mentioned like a cell phone backup. You can even stream over a cell phone, so you can have that like hooked up to your switch.
And that's just something to point out is there's risk involved. I think it's get a little deep into this here. I think the future, especially with what's going on now, I think it's really makes sense. Is I think the future tends to want to unfold randomly and in chaos. And
what evidence
one of the really interesting things about live streaming. Oh my goodness, is we're like willing the future to happen in a certain way at a certain time.
It's a funny time, isn't it?
And so it is, and I think that's one of the beauties of live streaming is it's the fun of like trying to make, you know, all that randomness and chaos actually happen in a certain way at a certain place at a certain predictable time. Yeah. But I guess enough of that. Let me see any questions. Great to know about backup streams. Greg said he never knew that was available, and that's a question you know, that when we talk about the framework that I ask myself. And you know, sometimes not having a backup is acceptable risk, you know, depending upon the resources I have available or the crowd I want to reach. I believe Facebook now does have a supported backup. It didn't always. But if you wanted to reach a large crowd, and you know, that's where your audience is, you know, Facebook made sense is a solution. But you know, to being aware of those risks. All right, so kind of home stretch here. Let's see. What time is it? Should we do? Anyone want to take a quick 2 or 3 minute break, or do we want to kind of float through to the end here? I'll leave a beat. Let's see how everyone's doing, just to check in and see if anyone wants to take a brief pause. I think this tail end will be a little bit lighter, but we're just going to slow it down and talk about the network and real briefly, and then we'll talk about the platform, the actual thing that we're going to use to stream out on. Okay. Well, I'm not hearing back from anybody here. So I think we'll just keep going on, and we'll just touch on these really briefly. We're not going to go in too deep. You know, I'm not a network expert, and you know, but it's something that we touch. You know, we find that you know, we're going to have to touch a lot more parts of production. We're going to have to touch the network. We're going to have to touch technology, input devices, camera. We're going to need to make all those things come together to have a successful live stream. So I'm just going to focus this one slide really quick on the network connections that a lot of us are experiencing home. I think it's actually fun if you go online, you'll see that broadcasters from ESPN, you know, NBC, ABC, they're actually posting pictures of their home studios online. It's really fun to go online and check out some of the setups. These professionals that are now kind of been forced to you know, work at home because of social distancing, that they're setting up at home and getting running. You know, I think you need to note that a lot of home internet connections, that they're much slower than the business connections that we have, and that these connections in a lot of cases are not guaranteed. And so I recommend that you go to speedtest.net, check it out. Whenever the date and time of your event is, try to check it out on a similar time, similar day, and make sure you have enough bandwidth. You're looking at the upload speed, remember. And remember, a lot of these companies will advertise these insane download speeds that are great for watching movies, great for streaming media. But when it comes to streaming, you ask them what their upload guaranteed upload speed is, and I would encourage people, call your internet provider, ask them what their guaranteed upload speed is. A lot of them will not be able to tell you because they generally don't have one, which makes me really very nervous. So my direction, and this varies on a speedier internet connection, I try not, for my home internet connection, not to exceed 1/10 of my upload speed. And I would think about that for slower upload speeds that are maybe reported as like less than 10 megabits a second. And I'm not a network engineer, but this has just been my experience, is that when I see slowdowns, they can be much more drastic than if you had a really big internet connection where you can push a lot of things up at the same time. So I am ultra conservative, and it changes. You know, as it steps up, I don't worry about it as much. Go ahead, Kurt.
So just a couple things on quality, because, you know, I care a lot about the quality. And again, I was mentioning earlier, audio, people really care about the audio. And so just in this term of bandwidth and so forth, I want to mention a tool that I found really useful called Zencastr. It's I just Googled it. It's Caster, TR at the end instead of TER. But anyway, Zencaster, Google it. And what it does is you have like a voice over IP conversation, just sort of a normal conversation with somebody, but then it actually emails you a full high resolution, high quality wave audio file, like a professional audio file that you could use in a podcast or something like that. So if you're doing something for later production that doesn't need to be live like we are now, if you're doing something for later production, using a tool like Zencaster can be really useful. The other thing in quality, what I wanted to mention is I have had ridiculously good success with my silly little, they've got stickers on them. That's why they're red. But anyway, they're just AirPods. The microphone in these things is crazy good. Like I've live streamed just using my AirPods and had shockingly good results, where some people have said that it's better than this really expensive microphone, just my AirPods. So just a couple little streaming advice in terms of upping your quality. I guess this isn't really about streaming, but just in terms of upping your quality, those are two little suggestions.
And it's cool is you probably understand this more than I do, but if you have both of them in, they're beam forming, so it isolates your voice, and it does the best quality by selecting between these multiple microphones.
I mean, basically, it takes some crappy little microphones and then does all of this amazing software processing and turns them into like world-leading microphones where you can hardly tell the difference between this. So it's like amazing software that is processing the hell out of these little stupid microphones. Yeah, so it's beamforming. It's like isolating the sound and everything. It's just incredible what they can do. So I recommend those. You know what I need though, Steve? I need a Zencaster for video so that I could do like a lousy Skype call, and then at the end of the Skype call, it would email me both the video and the audio, so that I wouldn't get so that for some of the interviews I do for later publication, I don't need, and then I don't want to send a whole film crew. That gets expensive, right? And so what I want to do is just get a little Zencaster that includes video. I wish that existed. Anybody?
That would be cool. Maybe there's a business there. Well, I just want to be mindful of people's time. So that's all I really have to say about network. Is consider what your upload speed is, and consider if anyone else is going to be on. Consider if you're going to be doing a video conference call. You need to remember that besides this live stream that we're pushing out, I've got this video conference call with Kurt, and that's also using bandwidth. And you might not always know about how much bandwidth that uses. There are tools that you can look at your network and test it, but if you don't want to dive that deeply in, you can just assume that they use about 2 to 4 megabits, if you're doing like a video conference call. So just wanted to mention that. And that being said, is I think the time to move on to a big topic here, is getting it out to the millions of people that will enjoy your stream. And I say millions, Kurt, just because I think this is kind of funny, because people always think that they'll have tons and tons and tons of people, but in reality, the audience ends up being a lot smaller. But it just needs to be the right audience, I think, is really the core of it, that you're finding the right audience, not millions of people, but the right people.
Well, and building an audience,
right,
and also setting a time so that people know when to tune in. And
yeah. And so I just wanted to I keep mentioning this framework, and I just wanted to add a little bit more color in terms of what I'm talking about. And this framework, I tend to be somewhat platform agnostic, meaning that I will use the platform and tool that is fit for purpose. Like I said, if your followers are on Facebook, maybe it makes sense to go to Facebook. If you're a gamer, maybe it makes a lot of sense to go and do your stream on Twitch. There are paid and free platforms. Some of the free ones off the top of my head, we've got Facebook Live, we've got YouTube Live, we've got Twitch, we've got Periscope. There's some other ones that I haven't mentioned, like Instagram, because it's much more challenging to get a broadcast feed into something like Instagram. It's more focused on your cell phone. But check back on those all the time, because it tends to evolve. and they're great free ways to reach your audience. That being said, I'm going to just kind of step through these and tell you about the questions that I ask myself regarding social tools, setup, encoding, disrupted encoding, and editing the final product. So the social tools, when I'm evaluating a platform, I tend to look at the interactions that we can have with the audience, and is there a Q&A functionality? Is there a chat functionality? One of the things I played around with is how much of a delay. If you ask a question and am I going to see it 30 seconds later, a minute later? I want to know those things. For some of the free platforms, I want to know, can I turn those off? Maybe as a business, especially when we're talking about COVID, you've had some really hot button issues that you've had to attend to. Can you turn that chat or question mark off? So those types of things, and then the setup. I want to know, do I need any graphics or assets or titles, tags, descriptions beforehand? I want to know who's going to see my audience. Who is my audience? If my audience is my own internal team of executives or my own internal teams of employees, and I'm having a difficult conversation, I don't want that getting out on YouTube Live. And so maybe that wouldn't be the best choice. Even things that I think one of the most common ways to protect something is by a password. Maybe even that's not good enough, because if someone has the password in the URL, that can get out. So thinking about how your live stream is secured, and is it being reached by the right people and only the right people. And then I think about my encoding, and that's part of my setup process. I look at, if I get an RTMP information, is it usable every time? For instance, I'm doing this YouTube stream, and I'm using the same URL, so I know my encoder, I don't have to set it up again. I can just feed it into YouTube and hit start on YouTube, and just pair my event with that one RTMP URL. And then I look at what happens if there's a problem. So I was doing a private stream, and I said, what happens if I disconnect? Do I have a new video on demand? Do I lose my audience? This used to happen quite a lot with Facebook, where your event would just end. And then all the promotion, all the social interactions, all the likes and stuff like that, they're just gone. And it's really hard for people to rejoin your stream. And then lastly, I look at the kind of editorial process. What happens after you stop streaming? Is it immediately available to view? Do I want that? Maybe my recording needs to go through legal first and get approved or edited. And that being said, can I download my recording afterwards? Is that even an option? Can I do things like chapter mark our recording? Can I share segments of it? Can I create little bite-sized segments? And so these are all just considerations. And I put them here in categories because you probably have your own considerations for your own business and your own use case. And if you're a professional and someone wants to stream to YouTube, you can think about questions that you want to ask whoever's requesting the service from you to help give them the best guidance of what platform to use. There are tons and tons of paid services out there that have varying degrees of capabilities. There's entire things that are almost like your own private YouTube, just off the top of my head. And some of these I've used before. Kaltura, is almost like a whole private YouTube. IBM has a solution. Vimeo, Brightcove, Panopto, Kumu. There's no lack of platforms. So if you want something where you have more control over who sees the content, and then what the other content that is being associated with it, what they're seeing, that's can be a good way to go, and they can go, from very low costs of just paying for a bandwidth for a single off event to tens of thousands of dollars or $100,000 for a really full feature-rich platform that is almost like your own private YouTube in a way. So I'm going to check in here, and I think some people are dropping off here at the bottom of the hour here. I know we're running over an hour, but I think I said this could be about an hour and 30 minutes, and I think we're there. That being said, do you folks have any questions for us? Is there anything that we can answer? Are there any topics that maybe you'd like to have us talk about in the future? Kurt or I had a fun time doing this, really. I think this has been a really engaging audience.
We get to nerd out with our gear.
Oh yeah, we get to nerd out with our gear, and I think there's two crowds. There's we have a really professional crowd that does this, and it's part of their livelihood, and then there's a crowd that is looking to reach new audiences, and I'm hoping to connect with those people as well. So let us know in the comments, if not on the live stream, if you're watching this afterwards, let us know if there's topics that you'd like to talk about, gear, hardware you'd like us to review, streaming engine, or StreamYard, the TVU, bonded cellular, those types of things. Let us know if there's something you'd like us to go deeper on. I think it's, I feel really fortunate that Kurt and I have the ability to play with some really high-end hardware, software on a kind of a day in, day out basis. And if there's something that the community is really interested in, I'd like to share more of that myself.
Definitely.
Well, cool. I'll hold here for just one more second and see if we have any other questions. How about content of? I'd like to understand the trends for the types of content that for content being streamed. I think that's a whole other topic. We can look at the analytics and consumption of content. That's a big topic. I really like that one. That would be a great talk. And Harmonic Digital said, great presentation, very informative. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for trying something new. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to connect with with a new audience. Really appreciate it. All right.
Thank you so much, everybody.
And I think, with that, yeah, Kurt. Well, thank you for joining me.
You.
And we'll see you again. We'll see you again next time.